Yes, I'm Nigel Cameron. I run a think tank in Washington, D.C., the Center for Policy on Emerging Technologies, and also engage in some consulting and speaking around the place on these technologies. Who's particularly interested in the long-term impacts of technology and how business, technology, and policy interrelate. Perhaps the biggest single transformation taking place because of big data is in the auto industry, where we have these extraordinary developments which are basically being driven by the capacity which we have now to have data in the cloud and to manipulate it in a way in which, but even just 10 years ago, for example, was considered to be impossible because the whole driving thing was too complicated. So this is perhaps the most dramatic, and of course here we have an old-fashioned traditional industry which is being absolutely revolutionized by the availability of data in the cloud. Well, of course, one of the advantages, which is, I suppose, one reason why Dubai has become so significant in these discussions is because here, you've started from scratch, you started very recently, you don't have the whole legacy of traditional industries or indeed a lot of built infrastructure. And in this environment, it's a lot easier to make rapid technological change. And certainly, therefore, to draw on sort of big data as a resource in this context, there's a freshness about it. I mean, I'm sure this is one reason why, of course, Dubai has become very significant in these discussions in the whole, certainly within MENA. Well, if you can solve the problem of privacy and security of big data, you've solved the central problem, perhaps, of the 21st century. Because the combination of the privacy issues and also the vulnerabilities, particularly asymmetric vulnerabilities, which keep being demonstrated, are terrifying. And on the one hand, we don't quite know in terms of civil privacy, privacy of the individual, what the tolerance, if you like, or the ultimate values, I think, of consumers are. I think they're very uncertain. What we do know is that asymmetric vulnerabilities are extraordinary. And we have proved ourselves to be pretty incompetent, both commercially and as governments, in handling those asymmetries. And so I think this is really where the most interesting discussions lie. Well, plainly, I mean, the credit industry is the one which has taken some serious hits here, because this is where most of people's financial information is stored, and in these enormous vats, which the credit reporting bureaus are, and which, of course, credit card companies are and banks are. And so that's, in a sense, where we've seen most readily how these vast amounts of material can be accessed, and accessed, by individual hackers, of course, by governments and so on. But of course also in government, I mean, perhaps the worst ever hack, of course, was the Office of Personnel Management, which is where the US government keeps all its personnel records. And out of that has come basically every single application for security clearance over the last 10 years is now in the hands of somebody, which basically has made the whole spying industry almost impossible. So I mean these asymmetric hacks have accessed materials in a way which I think we haven't fully digested the disastrous significance of this kind of access. And we're the ones who've been building up these huge stores of materials. I mean, the only way you get this information a generation ago was by, spending, months and months photocopying documents. And now, of course, the whole thing is accessible to keystrokes. I think nobody is taking it seriously enough. It's a fair sort of thing to say. The question is, how not seriously enough are people taking it? I mean, my own take on this would be that the chairman of the company or the chief executive of the city, or people in those roles should have a private door to the head of cybersecurity, because basically all of these enterprises, public and private enterprises, essentially consist of a database, and defending that database is the central responsibility of the executive who's meant to be handling it. Very interesting case most recently of the hacking of the Jeep Cherokee. I don't know whether that was reported over here in California. It was a friendly hack, although the driver of the Jeep nearly got killed because of the way in which it was done. And it was very interesting that Sergio Marchionne, who's the guy who runs Fiat Chrysler, who's something of a character, is famous for having up to 200 direct reports. And it would be very interesting to know whether the cybersecurity guy was one of them the day before the hack. My suspicion is that he was the day after the hack, because that's the kind of significance which lies in cybersecurity. But my suspicion is in most organizations, the cybersecurity person is way down the pecking order under the CTO, and then around 2/3 of the Fortune 500 companies, the CTO reports to the CFO, which suggests that these companies have no notion of how significant cybersecurity is. Well, plainly, humans are a vulnerability in one sense. I mean, traditionally, one of the standard ways hackers have got into corporate systems has been looking for present and former members of staff working at senior positions in IT and using their access into the system to break in and so on and so forth. I mean, this is, if you like, purely human frailty, people forgetting to get themselves properly logged out. At the same time, of course, there'll always be human players, and in the case of people like Nick Snowden and so on, these characters who've operated in the national security area, conscientious individuals, but equally you could have wicked individuals. The real problem is that our systems are designed to assume, on the assumption that humans are highly motivated, highly organized, highly loyal, and able to be controlled. And that plainly is not the case. My suspicion is, in terms of psychometric profiling, there are all kinds of things you could be doing, but the way in which our corporations and governments so far have responded to these threats suggests that it may be more than the next 5 years before we get these things under some kind of control, if we do. One of the interesting emerging moves, it seems to me, in this situation is people going back to old technology. There's a very interesting book that's come out by Peter Singer, who's a defense expert in Washington, called Ghost Fleet, about a war scenario in which the US goes back to using its mothballed, old-fashioned, pre-digital ships because they can't be hacked. And I hear that the Kremlin is now buying typewriters. And it seems to me that these are interesting components in the way in which we finally build cyber defense.